my mum was like, you shouldn't go to the gym if you're ill. But then I was like, I don't know, I feel like I want to, and I feel like I don't really agree with that. And then I was thinking as well, like, do you know something weird about the gym? After you go, you feel like more energized.
Mm.
Then I was like, that's paradoxical because you're releasing a lot of energy to do that workout, but then afterwards you feel more energized for the rest of the day. So I wonder if that's something I feel like you'd know and why
Well,
that
two
is.
two things. I'll address the first bit first, which is should you train when you're ill? And from personal experience, I've made a mistake of like being a bit ill and going, ah, that's all right. I'll just take two ibuprofen and train for 3 hours. And then by the end of the 3 hour training session, I am feeling worse. So you have to kind of weigh it up because obviously the fatigue of exercise will hurt your immune system. You know what I mean? Like exercise causes damage to your body that then your body recovers from and like recovers stronger and better and all of that. But that damage, doing that damage to yourself when you're in an ill state isn't always ideal. But then there's a level of, well, it depends how ill you are. Like if you're a little bit ill, then maybe going for a walk or like a light resistance session in the gym, that might actually help you. It's just like don't be mental and push hard. Like I'll be a bit ill and then I'll take some drugs and then scrimmage for 2 hours. And it's like that's not a good idea. But to address the second part of your question, which was about the energy point, it always takes me back to what Andrew Huberman said, where he was like, people often assume that the way to get more energy is through food or through like sleep. But he said the third kind of less obvious, I guess, source of energy, which is probably the most powerful, to be honest, is this neuro energy, this neurochemical energy, which is to do with, your levels of different neurotransmitters in the brain and your hormone levels. And all of that can be stimulated through things like, he always preaches about sunlight and hydration and exercise. Like that source of energy to me is much more powerful. And that's what you get from like exercise because you put your body in that state of stress or whatever. It releases certain endorphins and there's neurochemical changes in your brain and hormonal changes. So then when you're finished, you're feeling the effects of your body like forcing that neurochemical change in order to do the exercise. You're feeling that effect then into the next few hours of the day and you feel better. Does that make
So
sense?
wait, the in is the benefit from the is from the endorphins and the sort of neurons getting stronger.
Well, it's your body. It's your body. I think. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, and I haven't like read papers and shit. I'm just kind of going off like what I think I know. But you're putting your body in a state of stress, right? So your body's got to respond to that and give you energy. Like your body doesn't really know what a bench press is. It just knows that there's a fucking heavy thing on my chest that I've got to push up. Or like your body doesn't know what a treadmill is, but your body knows what running fast is, right? So your body will activate whatever kind of physiological processes to enable you to do that thing and overcome that obstacle. And then those kind of those hormonal changes and neurochemical changes will then persist over a longer period of time, even when the exercise is done. Because you think about it, like if we're in the ancestral times, I'm just putting my evolutionary psychology hat on that's not like backed up with evidence. So, I have to caveat with that. But like, imagine we're in ancestral times and we've got to run after a wild boar and like throw a spear at it or whatever. Like, your body's gonna go through certain changes to enable you to do that. So I think that's kind of what exercise simulates, I guess.
Mm. Tell me about on paper practicality.
Mm. I love it, Jake, when like things from my life outside of like psychology and the podcast and our personal development journey and stuff, then then enables me to formulate some kind of theory that I can apply to this context that gives me a frame to think about the world. So yeah, there's this idea of something on paper versus something in practicality. And we wrongly assume or we get wrong like how good the thing will be in either of those like two sides to it. So I'll give you an example. Like we talk a lot in sport about how good a team is on paper and then how good they are in practicality, right? You hear that a lot in football, I guess. And obviously I hear it a lot in my basketball world of like this team has five players that on paper should beat this team. But in practicality, maybe they don't because the other team works better as a unit and they're more coherent. They're like one organism working together. They understand their roles and they know what's best for them as a collective. Whereas Team A, who on paper are maybe more talented and more skilled individuals, don't play as much like together. They're not as gelled. And I took that and I go, well, actually, there are so many parts of life where the thing on paper is not as good as it is in practicality. And there are also parts of life where on paper it doesn't seem as good, but in practicality, it's actually a lot better. And if you can learn to identify these situations and choose the ones where in practicality it's actually better, or at least it is as good as it says it is on paper, then you're going to likely to make better decisions and take better opportunities. So like I made a list, I think like in my notebook here, and let me just I'll quickly find it for you, of things where I went, well, okay, what's better on paper than it actually is in practicality from my own experience? And I put like, well, achievements in the material world because you work towards them for so long on paper, like winning that medal, winning that game, or like getting that mark on your exam or your essay, or like whatever it is, right? Just material like achievement, like getting that those new clothes or that car or whatever. Actually, in practicality, when you get it, it's not as satisfying as you think it was going to be. Another point I've put is status and like a social media following and like fame and stuff. You hear people talk about fame who actually made it and they're like, well, it's not good in practicality. You know, they can't go to normal places. They feel like they have the eyes of the world on them at all times. But on paper, it seems great because you're like, oh, I would love the adoration of loads of people and that amount of power and that amount of potential income and things like this. Um, and then I just put a general point here as well, like getting sold a dream about a perfect job or opportunity or offer or lifestyle. It's always going to be better on paper than it is in practicality. There's always going to be things that you don't expect and you don't plan for that kind of decrease its value. But then on the other side of that, there are things that are so much better in practicality than on paper. This is boring shit. Well, not boring, but like obvious, mundane, cliche stuff that people just kind of gloss over, like nurturing your social relationships. Like on paper, that just sounds like wishy-washy and like what they teach you in PSHE. But like in practicality, if you have a strong friendship group or like a good romantic relationship, or your like relationship with your mum is good, or like you don't have social anxiety in larger social situations, that's like gonna have huge impacts on your mental health. The other one I put is like mindfulness, being present, right? On paper, it sounds boring. Like meditate or read or like look after your attention span. God, you just sound like a monk or like it's just like it's boring. But in practicality, that impacts and positively improves like everything in your life because your life is seen through your own mind. And if your mind is in a good position, then the texture of your experience is so much better. Now, I'll stop waffling and going on because I feel like you've got the point. But yeah, what do you think about this as a frame?
Gives it a good frame, definitely. Um, for the basketball context, does that mean you'd rather have like kind of like when it's on FIFA and you've got like this green chemistry on your team? Would
Yeah.
you rather have like five kind of mediocre people but with green like solid chemistry, or like just five monsters but they can't play together?
I mean, it depends what level you're talking about because like if you put it in the context of like the British League, you take five Prem players, even if they don't like work together whatsoever, they're gonna batter like a Div 3 team, a Div 2 team, maybe even a Div 1 team, like I don't know, a mid-range Div 1 team, they'll probably batter them. Um, but then I think the higher you go, um, in sport, at least in my experience, like I haven't made it or anything, but like the more competitive and better like elite sporting environments I've been in, the more like role playing and team playing and that cohesiveness comes through. Because at the end of the day, like let's say in the GB junior environment that I play in, like everyone can shoot the ball decently. Like everyone can push pretty quickly. Everyone has an understanding of the game. But the teams and the lineups that win are the ones that actually work cohesively, I guess. Because when you get, especially when you get to like, Paralympic and like senior international level, everyone can do everything basically within their classification. So the teams that win are the ones that have a system, I think. And I think that's why, like when I watch the Americans play that that won in Paris. They're just so well drilled. Like there's no hesitation from any of the players on what they do in each situation. It just looks like they had a plan and they executed on that plan and they were more ready. So yeah,
Yeah, I feel like towards your other points, uh, in business context, like it's rare for when you kind of sell something to someone, what you want is in practice um, to back up what's on paper, but I think that's
Mm.
rare. And I guess you'd ask, well, why does in paper get so much priority? And I think it's just easier to do. The perceived value is often easier to increase than the value itself.
Exactly.
Expectations are easier to they're they're easier to exaggerate than the reality is.
Like it's so much easier to persuade somebody and understand human nature than create a product that's so good that that person can't ignore it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we I guess we don't seem to want to take the time to understand the in practice.
It's like you can think about this in a product sense, right? That sales is what you're trying to communicate on paper, and then when somebody actually experiences the product, that's it in practicality. If you can get a product that is good on paper, like your sales funnel and your sales pitch and whatever is good, but then it's even better in practicality, then like that's gonna explode. And like the things in life that we use most often and that we use so much and we put so much of our money into, um, because that in practicality it's just so useful, so good, and we don't even think about it as like a product that we spend money on. It's so good we can't ignore it and can't not use it. And I think isn't it like Hormozy had a frame where he was like, um, if your product is so good you don't need marketing. And if your marketing is so good, you don't need sales. Like what he's basically saying is, if your product is so good in practicality, people will talk about that by word of mouth, and it will spread like a forest fire. And you don't actually need to try and sell somebody something on paper because your product is just good.
Yeah, the opposite is Naval, and he says you're doing marketing because you sucked at sales, and you're doing sales because you sucked at product. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do think I think it's very difficult to for the product to sell itself. I think if you're like a craftsman, if you're a real craftsman at what you do, it will sell itself if you're a real artist. Um, but I'm not sure if that's like achievable straight away. But anyway, it's what we should like, at least aim for anyway, because
Mm.
then you disappoint people. And
What? Yeah, exactly that. That's what I loved so much about Cal Newport's book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. Because he basically just said, like, if you want to do something in your life, get so bloody good at it that the world cannot ignore you. So in practicality, become so good, like make your product so good that the world craves it, the world needs it, and the world admires it, that then you'll get some sort of income from that, even if it takes like years or decades. And I just love that as a philosophy because it keeps you grounded and it keeps you focused on, right, well, what's going to move the needle here to where I want to go? It's going to be work. It's not going to be trying to use yap and persuasion and manipulation to try and convince people that you're good at something or convince people that you should buy they should buy whatever you're trying to sell, whether that's because we're all selling things, I guess, whether it's our ideas and our beliefs or it's that an actual physical product itself. Like you don't want to have to be relying on psychology, I guess. Like there's an element of that helping, but also just getting so good in practicality can help a lot.
yeah, and I do think social media is probably the best example of this, of the on paper, because it's literally literally kind of showcasing yourself as the product on
Mm.
paper. And I think, yeah, people benefit from having like there's a lot of people that will. prioritize like how their social media is, but if they had like better ideas and stories and lessons built up from time away from that, and then go back to share it, um, yeah, I think that would be better.
Mm, yeah. It's interesting. Like, I'll just add this final point before we move on. Like, take the fitness industry, for example. Like, people in insane shape will get big on social media because they're in insane shape, and then they use their own physique as like the on paper persuasion for somebody to then buy like whatever a fitness plan or a diet plan or whatever. And on paper, even just on an unconscious level, you're led to believe that if you buy their product, then in practicality you will look how they look on paper, or that you that's the dream you're being sold essentially. When in practicality, what will happen is, yeah, you follow a fitness plan and you'll get in better shape and you'll improve your health, and that's fantastic. But you're not going to look like the guy or girl that you saw on Instagram, um, because that's just not how it works. But then if they sold on paper like the thing would actually be in practicality, like if a big fitness influencer went, well, if you do this program, you're not going to get massively jacked massively quickly. You're probably not going to look like me, but you will, lose a few pounds and get a little bit stronger and maybe feel a little bit better. But they don't do that because it's not sexy and it's not a good like sales approach. So I think to just summarize this point for people listening, like be aware of how things in life will appear so great on paper when in practicality they're not. Like there are so many little traps like that, especially with sort of how our world in advertising and marketing and things are. But also, a positive point is there are things in your life that aren't sexy or like enticing on paper, but in practicality make your life a whole lot better. And really, they're just the fundamental things like how's your mindset? How are your relationships? How's your diet? Like, does what you do make you feel like you're worth something? They're the un unstimulating like things that actually move the needle. So
Yeah, I guess this kind of ties into it a little bit. I got some thoughts on kind of the morality of like lying, um, and sort of yeah, other points around it. And it came from um the other day when I was with Adam and one and I guess one of the reasons I like him is he's quite a playful person. And so he was basically going up to people. Well, he was when you talk to people and they would ask, well, when people ask what you do for work, he would think of the first thing that comes to his mind, and he would say it, whether it was like a neuroscientist, whether it was like um, a golf player, and then that is like you're not going to see that person again. And it makes the conversation more interesting because now you've got to come up with, okay, what does this person do for work? I'm going to tell this story. But then I was like, it's good because it's like you're using you're lying for the purpose of humor, not the person of just not the purpose of deceiving, but you're also but then that's only like for you that you're doing that. That you're the only one that's finding humor in it, or like you and your mate. And then I was like, okay, what if you use this context of like how many people like on a date would like kind of oversell themselves or like over kind of lie about what they do so that they come across interesting. I feel like that's very fucking common. Um, and so then how much should you twist the fabric of reality um, in a context of making a conversation better? Um, and I mean, like, I know I quite like I liked the idea of, well, when someone asks what you do for work, um, you make something up on the spot and you say how far it takes you. Because, like, I don't really want to tell people that I do a podcast because then it just depends on, like, if my number of streams and followers is an acceptable amount for them to how much they judge you.
Mm.
Like that's the thing on paper. And that's what the conversation will result in if that number is acceptable for them. And so that's why we kind of say like it's better for people to find out for themselves. Um, yeah, I'll add a bit more if you want to comment.
Um, yeah, I think there's like a there's I don't know if you can call like you're on a date and you present the best version of you in that moment as a lie. Because unless you're like obviously, saying that you do a different job or you like are a different person, that's not good. That's psychopathic. But it's like if I bring like, you know, energetic, caffeinated, like happy Joel to a situation, it's not a lie. Like I'm not that Joel on like 8 p.m. on a Tuesday evening when I'm tired, obviously, but it's still me. It's just me excited. It's me in a good state of mind, which isn't a lie. It's just you're going to present the best version of you in a situation where you want to do that. Um, and in terms of the being playful in public and like creating this fake narrative, I mean, we love doing that as humans. We love imagining like different realities for ourselves. And I think that's okay as a bit of a joke with your mates, as long as it's not at the cost of the other person. I mean, as long as they're not like you're not causing any harm to them mentally or emotionally or whatever, like you're fine. Like if it's just a passing stranger on the street and you have a small interaction that they're never gonna think about again and you get a bit of joy from it, I think that's okay. But there's certainly a line that can be crossed when like you want to believe the lie about the lie about yourself that you like emit to the world. You want to believe that more than what things actually are like. But yeah, that's all I'll comment for now.
Yeah, your conclusion was good. If as long as it's not a cost to the other person, I think that's something to think about. Yeah, I guess I meant more in the dating example. I think a lot of people would just exaggerate that they're like a businessman or an artist when they're not maybe like not successful and they're trying to like oversell through that way. But I know what you mean. Um, and I remember you said something quite interesting the other day of how manipulation is really just making people come to the decision themselves.
Mhm.
That's like the best way. And like whether that's um like you're getting realizing your coach underplayed you, um, or whether it's like seducing a girl or getting sales, the best way of doing that is making them come to the decision themselves.
Mhm.
And there's real kind of intangible skill in that. It's why they teach you when you're doing social media to talk to the camera as if you're saying you rather than I, because you're talking to you. You're not saying I did this, and that's why there's a lot of kind of Robert Greene rules of like Laurie, get people to come to you, use bait as necessary, and win for actions and not for argument, which is kind of what you did in your basketball example. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's an art of being indirect, um, and suggestive,
Mhm.
um, to kind of get someone to do what you want them to do, like without kind of because when you're suggestive or indirect, like it moves them along without them thinking too much into it, or like yeah, that's yeah.
It's interesting that this just hearing you speak, and I know it's not the way that we both get this across, but it sounds like the Robert Greene stuff. There's always a level of danger that it sounds like we want to be manipulative for our own gain in life. But I don't think that's the case necessarily. Like maybe in a basketball environment for me, or like you in a business context, like there is obviously self-interest, but generally I think you can use the same like principles, the meta skill of like social skills and like psychology and stuff to make things better, not just for you, but for also the people around you. So these ideas we talk about of like suggesting something for someone or wanting someone to come to a decision by themselves, it might be, your friend is struggling in this situation. They struggle to just take your advice at face value. So you act as an example that they then realize that they want to follow and they can change their behavior that way. Or it's like we're trying to do we talk about this stuff not in a like egoic self like trying to satisfy self-interest way. It's about like the collective good, um, which I think is like the side of, I guess, Robert Greene's work that people don't see because the stuff that's obviously more interesting and captivating is like, oh, it's banned in prisons and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah.
Tell me about psychopathology.
Yeah, so I'm reading in this book that I think I mentioned last week by a Jungian analyst called James Hollis. It's called A Life of Meaning, like relocating your center of spiritual gravity. And in one of the early chapters, early pages, in this book, I'll just say like it's great because in every paragraph there's something I go, oh, that's nice. Um, and I think when you get a book like that where they say so much in so little words, it's like it's powerful. But anyway, one of his first bits that he talks about is the etymology, and etymology just means like the origin of words. The etymology of the word psychopathology comes from the Greek word psyche, which means soul, the Greek word pathos, which means suffering, and the Greek word logos, which means to express or to speak. And so if you look at the etymology of the whole word psychopathology, it means the expression of the suffering of the soul, which is really interesting. And that isn't how we think about mental health disorder or issues or discomfort in the modern day. We see it as a problem that we need to cure through, therapy or medication. And we see it as something to avoid. We see mental afflictions, even on the smallest daily level of like you wake up in the morning and you don't feel motivated to do the things you need to do in your day, or you don't feel confident in a certain situation, or you have anxiety about something that's coming up in the future, to then, the larger things like, proper mental health disorders and clinical cases. But all of it if you view it through that frame that it's the expression of the suffering of the soul, it means it's not something to avoid or cure, but something to I guess listen to, um, and understand and gain an awareness of to then course correct in life. Because James Hollis's view in the book is that there are unconscious forces that are molding the narrative of your life and your behavior. And if something goes wrong and you feel bad or you fall into some sort of mental disorder or mental discomfort, that's the soul trying to communicate to you that you're going awry, you're not on the right path. And I think that is such a beautiful way to view mental health because and I think there's a level of truth in it. Obviously I can't speak on like extreme disorder and stuff like that because I'm not an expert and those cases are so specific and there's real suffering there, so I don't want to like gloss over that in a podcast and say, oh, just listen to what your soul says, because obviously that's arrogant and just untrue. But I'm talking about the daily or the regular mundane mental health fluctuations that we all experience no matter who we are. If we view them as expressions of the suffering of the soul rather than something to avoid, we can actually gain a lot of benefit from it. Like it's like you can alchemize that uncomfortable situation to something good. So like if you have an argument with, and it's a very sort of, I don't know, basic example that I'm just coming off with on the top of my head, but let's say you have an argument with a close friend, and then the next day you feel anxious about seeing them again, or you're sad because of how the situation unfolded, well, that's your soul like expressing to you that that's something you should repair. Then you should go and make the effort to sort of resolve that situation and make things better. Or like the times in my life where I don't feel good, it's always because I've kind of taken a move off the path that I should be on. And when I feel the best is when I'm in my flow and I'm hitting the target of the things that I care about in my life. And I feel like what I'm doing matters. And then you can view it on the other side where like positive mental health is also an indicator that you're like on a good path and that your soul is communicating to you to keep doing what you're doing. So it's a bit spiritual, it's a bit wishy-washy, but I think there's some value in this.
Yeah, that book sounds really, really good. Like even the title, like spiritually grounding and stuff, like,
I was thinking when I was reading that, I'm like, when I finish this, I'm gonna give it to Jacob.
hmm, if it's not too difficult to me, I'll give it a go.
Oh, it's fine. It's not like, you're reading like actual philosophers and shit. This is like it's a transcription actually of talks that this guy's done.
Hmm. I think it's a very good context to apply this to like haters in that we all have to really remember that hurt people, and that when we get haters, it's not us. It's what they're saying is just a reflection of them and their mental state, and we really have to remind ourselves that um, because you can get caught up in listening to the criticism of others, and so you said the conclusion was about listening to your soul. Um,
Let me just add to this because something's popped to my mind. In the book, he talks about like the obvious thing that we don't control our emotions. Something happens in our external life that we don't have control over, and then spontaneously we get these deep feelings that can really sort of rock us because they're deep and unavoidable. It's like you can't tell an emotion, you can't turn an emotion off. And so he said that's your unconscious or your spirit or your soul or your psyche or your mind, whatever word you want to use. That's that communicating to you that communicating to you how you're interacting with the world. That is
mm,
it's a great indicator. Right now I'm in a state of enthusiasm, and presence, and joy because I think there's a deep part of me that knows that the podcast is good for me. Whereas if I go into a situation where I'm feeling anxious, then that's whatever in me, that my spirit communicating to me that I'm interacting with the world in a uncertain way. That's not always necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like this is a novel situation that you haven't experienced before, and it might be a threat. I think it's just an interesting way to view things. But carry on with what you were saying.
was it is it sadistic people that enjoy the suffering of others? Is that the
Mm.
right word? Yeah, yeah. I feel like those type of people, they're trying to outsource their suffering, um, to then kind of I know I feel like they're the type of people that like the hate comments on our posts. They enjoy our suffering. They enjoy like even though kind of we're not. Um, yeah, I feel like people outsource their suffering. I think that's a good way to put it. In that if your world is a bit kind of chaotic, you'd rather see someone else as doing worse than you, and
Mm.
then it makes you feel a bit better.
100%. 100%. If you're in dark states of mind like that, seeing somebody else go through something, or like, I don't know, not just on the level of our hate comments, I guess, but just any situation where if somebody's struggling, it makes you feel justified, I guess, which is kind of a dark part of human psychology that maybe we don't want to think about, but it's definitely relevant. But then I think just generally, like if people get a little bit of joy out of people ripping into us in the comments, like I'm all for that. Like, get your little bit of dopamine, guys. Like, it's such a it's also a way to pacify like any kind of anxiety or negative emotion that could come to me if I like read those comments. If I just respond to it with positivity and go, look, have some fun, like enjoy it, man. Like, get your bit. I like there's an idea that there are many people that will just have a little giggle at what we do. That's great because I don't give a shit because I love doing this podcast so much. So it's like the ultimate way to pacify that
Mm.
threat of negative emotion is just to like laugh at it and respond positively.
Yeah, I think that's one of our biggest strengths is that we don't take ourselves too seriously and we welcome the hate.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, I think I'm gonna pivot onto my main point. I like that. I like that point though. I think that was really good. So it was It's one of Kierkegaard's main theories of what he's known for. I haven't read him, but I kind of read about this. And it's a theory called either or. And so the idea is you either live an aesthetic life or you live so an aesthetic yeah, you either live an aesthetic life, you either live an aesthetic life or you live an ethical life. And this is kind of being a tongue twister for me, but an aesthetic life is one that basically tries to avoid suffering and seeks pleasure and avoids deep sort of responsibility. Whereas an ethical life is one of virtue, one of embracing suffering and sort of some sort of religious devotion, maybe. And the he, Kierkegaard says like the worst life is one of indecision. And so you can't pick both. And when you try and pick both, he says you end up in this state of self-deception, this kind of you're very like passive. You have this existential like dissatisfaction, and he says life will eventually force you through some sort of crisis or realization, where maybe you were this rebellious kid, um, that sort of maybe your parents were religious and you sort of got sick of it and decided to be a savage. Or you start being really hedonistic and then you realize that was shallow. So the two different kind of um, it would be either a crisis or a realization. And I thought I think this is a decently big problem. And I see it in myself as well that like most people are trying to do a bit of both. They're trying to not suffer and be have a decent amount of pleasure, but then also live with virtue and maybe a higher power. And so, well, a lot probably like I said, you can't do that, and that's why I think all these people feel lost. And yeah, when like I apply it to myself, like um I've kind of already overcame the crisis of, well, I'm going to suffer for the next 5 years, while people around me sort of enjoy themselves. And so I have to be okay with that. Um, and that's why I think I like connect with people that have suffered. Um, but I and that's maybe a situation where I've done this well when I've committed more into the ethical life, but then like with like relationships, I'm still like scared of taking my dating life seriously because I don't think I'm valuable enough as a person. I don't have maybe the time and money to invest. Um, and but then on the other side, like I don't want to fall into hedonism and kind of be exchanging parts of my soul. Um, so in the relationship context, like I'm definitely an either or. And so I think uh, I'm waiting for the universe to kind of sway me in one way. But then this is different because in the past, like societies were more ethical. Like we operated in a
Is
lot
that
of
true
really
though? I don't know, like the extra cases of like murder and um like political sort of corruption and things. I think maybe I guess you viewing that because it's like religion was a larger thing, which
for
kind of
the wait for which
but
point?
for you saying that like in the past people were more ethical.
Oh, okay, okay. I think we had more religious dogma, and yeah, kind of solely on the religious side. But yeah, that's a good point. It might not be um completely true, but I feel like when you compare it to today, like we live in this world of abundance, where like the world kind of shows us what we should value.
Maybe
And
the point is that the world we live in today, there's so much more opportunity to live an aesthetic, pleasure-seeking life
mm,
because of that convenience and abundance.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, we just got all these values kind of compete against each other. And I know it reminds me of that scene in Breaking Bad where like I think it's Mike who's like, don't take a half measure. And like in the context of like you gotta go fully through with something, like you can't finish a job half-assed. Yeah, I know. I feel like it's why people are lost, um, living in either role.
Yeah, I remember Matthew McConaughey, one of his first points on modern wisdom last year, I think, it was don't half-ass it. Whatever
Mm.
you do, don't half-ass it. You know what I mean? If you want to really try towards something like virtuous and difficult, don't half-ass it. Like at least push yourself as far as you can go. And even if it fails, at least you know you did all that you could do. So the failure's fine. Or even if you want to, if you want to become a super fan of a particular movie or TV franchise, like don't half-ass it. Like become really good, become like super knowledgeable on that thing. Like it doesn't matter what thing you do. Um, pursue it at full intensity, and then at least you'll get an outcome that you should have got by trying hard. Um, but no, I like this. I like this frame. It's like I've questioned myself a lot when I fall into kind of unvirtuous, aesthetically focused behavior patterns. I know there's this like little voice in my brain that goes, yeah, but Joel, you can't live like this and be the person you want to be. It's like that ethical voice that's going where you can't indulge in the ways that you are and be the person that you want to be most. And what would you really prefer? Is it this momentary pleasure and satisfaction, or do you want to look at your life and go, well, you became the person that you knew you could be for the world and for your communities and for yourself? So it's very true. And I think people are there is a drive in people to live an ethical life. They just maybe don't know how, or it's so easy, isn't it, to just get kind of caught in the whirlwind of modern convenience and abundance. Failure is terrifying. Suffering is scary. That's why it's suffering. It's not nice. But do you want your life to be nice? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Um, so I like this. I like that idea that you can it's like it links back to the cringy story that I told, like many, many podcasts ago about people in my A-level classes going, oh, I wish I could have the results you get. And it's like, do you though? Because like when you go and have like that house party at the weekend, you look like you're having a good time, but you can't both do that and do what I'm doing at the same time. We just don't have enough time to do that. So like, yes, that's a cringy like example that makes me sound like a dickhead, but the principle is that. You can't both have this and that. It's not, you can't either or. You know what I'm saying? Like, I get jealous when I see you guys going and having a great time socially, and for some reason, probably my own like insecurity and weird ambitious brain made me like wake up on a Saturday morning and study. But that's life. That's the decision I made. So you got to live by it. Don't half-ass it. You know what I mean?
Mm. There's I saw a clip of Peterson saying how men should be like a shepherd. That should be the masculine role model, because a shepherd is someone that takes care of lambs, um, I think, or sheep, and but he's also someone that protects them from wolves, um, and has this kind of responsibility, but it's also a leader, and it's a good metaphor. It's a good masculine metaphor. That's the biblical masculine metaphor, and I think that's, yeah. If you want to be an ethical person, try and be like a shepherd.
Mm. Yeah, man. Like, I want the best for people, I guess. I feel like I talked about this in a previous episode, didn't I? Like doing things out of love. That's a beautiful way to live your life, I guess. And that's an ethical way because love's painful at times. It's difficult to do things out of love. It's very easy to do things out of your own self-interest and the drives of your ego. That's your default mode. Um, but Yeah, doing things for a virtuous reason. What a beautiful way to live life. It's not easy, it's not nice, but do you want your life to be easy and nice? I don't think I do. Maybe you do, and if you do, that's great. Go and live a nice, easy life. That's fine. But like suffering's going to hit you at some point, so you've got to be kind of ready for it or aware of it, I guess.
I thought of this analogy of I feel like if you like someone just for their looks or their aesthetics, or you like something just for its aesthetics, um, it's like buying an apple but for the round shape and the red color.
Mm.
Like, would you rather have um, a wonky apple that tastes great,
Mhm.
smells great, and hopefully isn't bruised, or do you want this nice red like shaped apple when you bite into it, it's sour and
And also, that nice looking apple's going to decay anyway.
mm,
I mean, it's a nice, eventually it's going to start going moldy and shit. It's kind of like that, the idea you brought last week about this, what's real? What things are real? I've been thinking about that a lot. I think it applies to a lot of things, but like the things that we indulge in aesthetically, they don't, to me, then, they're nice in the moment. They'll stimulate a part of your brain and they'll make you feel, for a moment, your demons in your mind will cease to whisper in your ear, right? But they're not real things. You know what I mean? They don't really grip your soul. You don't, like I said in that clip that went viral, they don't grip me existentially. Whereas an ethical path, doing things more virtuously, that's a way to make your life feel real, man. And it's not pretty a lot of the time. It's like doing grunt work training, right? For basketball, doing the conditioning that I do is it's horrible. It's horrible. I have to go to a dark place to do that. But for some reason, when I go through that suffering in inverted commas, because obviously there's levels to that word, but when I go through that suffering voluntarily, the peace and clarity I get afterwards is so real, you know? So
mm,
real.
yeah, it's worth it for how you feel after. That's what I was trying to tell my parents and go when we were living in Tonga. I was like, you're gonna suffer for 20 minutes. The last 5 minutes are gonna be horrible, but when you get your head under that cold shower and you're lying in
Oh,
that pool, it's that peace and clarity and awareness is all worth it.
100%.
You've got another point about the ego who thinks he's in charge. Do you have time to go through that?
Yeah, screw it. We'll go. I need to be gone by 20 past, so we've got 8 minutes.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's another small one from the book I've been reading at the moment. Very, very small point, so it shouldn't take too long. But it's this idea that like the ego, which is best described, I guess, of the the mental mode that you operate in most of the time. The you that you would consider to be I, the you that kind of is you call your consciousness essentially, conscious you. Um, that version of you in your mind leads you to believe that he's in charge, like he's the one running the operating system. But that's so untrue. And there's so many like different little analogies and examples you can use to put that in context. But the way this author was trying to explain it, he was trying to like introduce and justify the idea that there are unconscious forces inside you that run a large degree of your life. He was like, when a cricket ball is hurling towards your head, what does your ego do? Nothing. There's no time to consciously think about what to do. There are then unconscious forces working at a split second to notice this projectile coming towards your head, like enact some sort of physiological change and activate the nervous system for you to duck, right? And not be hit by that thing. Where was your ego then? The part of you that thinks it's in charge of your life, where was it in that situation? And then the analogy that I came to, that I thought of when I was thinking about this, was thinking that the ego and the conscious you, the thing you refer to as I, believing that that runs your life is like believing that the keyboard and mouse is the computer. Well, it's not. The keyboard and mouse is the thing that you use to interact with the computer. The ego is the mode of being that you exist within in order to live your life, right? But it's the actual motherboard of the computer is those unconscious forces, those things that you aren't aware of, those mental processes that are going on all of the time that your ego has no idea about. Luckily, because imagine if we did, bloody hell, that would be a lot of work. And so it's just a nice little frame to remember that like there's a whole lot more to you than you think and that you're aware of. And
Mm.
that's something to think about, I think. You know, maybe it's only relevant to psychology nerds like me, but everyone experiences this, you know, and we get gripped by our ego so much that, you know, you become so ego possessed, you do just believe that that's who you are and what your life's about. But there's so much more to you than you thought.
The way that I interpret that is when the cricket ball's going towards your head, your ego is not the part of the psyche that has the ability to either catch it or to duck. Um, that'd be more kind of your conscious awareness or your probably your unconscious actually because it's going to be a reflex.
Reflexes. Yeah.
Um, and and so then you think, well, where is your ego when life gets hard? When the suffering builds up, what does your ego do? And it's all of a sudden you're not this grandiose person that you think you are.
Mm.
Um, and so, what's the practicality towards that? I mean,
I mean, it's a great reminder that you're not the stories you tell yourself about yourself. That's not
um,
what you are. I mean, like that's I think why the ego death feeling when you have a psychedelic experience, for example, can be so useful. Because there's one point he makes in the book as well about how, you know, the majority of our lives, no matter how successful we are or how like spiritually enlightened we are, we're all on automatic pilot a lot of the time. We're all living out narratives, right? About stories that we tell ourselves about what our life is and who we are and what matters and what we should do. Um, but they're not who you are. They're what your ego tells you you are. And so that's a good frame as well because, you know, Carl Jung's great quote that everybody lives out a myth and your myth might be a tragedy and you should know that because you might not want it to be. It's like, what's the narrative about your life that you're telling yourself? Because that determines a lot of your self-esteem and your self-worth and your level of anxiety and stuff. And it's just useful to know that what your mind tells you about what your life is and who you are isn't always true and isn't right. So you just got to be aware of your ego, man. We need one. We 100% need it to just exist in the world and do stuff and be a human, but it's not the entirety of you.
that quote, everyone lives out a myth, is that because you're one set archetype, like you can choose to be a hero, or is that referring to like the stories that we tell ourselves
I
about
think
who
it's
we are?
I think it's that we're all living out a story, even if it's unconscious. And that story informs us of how we should think about ourselves and our lives. You know, I think the difference between somebody who has high self-esteem and low self-esteem is just the story they tell themselves about who they are. And that's informed by the things they've done, the way their parents spoke to them when they were a child, the expectations and narratives of the society they live in. You know, we don't construct these narratives just on our own. There's so much that contributes to them, yeah. But we do all live out a story. I mean, you have a story that you live out, that you're a 20-year-old attempting to be an entrepreneur and reading philosophy and trying to sort of grow a podcast and you're a son to a set of parents and you're a brother and you're a friend and you're also a uni student and that's the story you tell yourself and you need that. It's functional. It allows you to have a secure identity to then go out in the world, but it's not who you are. You know, it's just a story you've decided to live out. There's a reality where Jacob Matthew makes different choices and then tells a different story about who he is. But because of the way your story's structured, that massively informs how you feel about yourself and your life. Um, so I think that's what Jung meant. We all live out a myth. We all live out a story. And your myth might be a tragedy because there are so many people with these narratives that are like, oh, I'm not good enough, or nobody loves me or I'm fundamentally unlovable or I'll never find peace and meaning in my life. Well, that's just a story you've decided to tell yourself. Yes, it might be informed by some evidence about how your parents treated you or that failure you had in school that crushed you or whatever. Like that's real. That stuff happens. But it doesn't mean you can't rewrite the story. And that's Jung's point. You might be living out a tragedy, but you need to know that because you might not want it to be and you might want to change that story to become, a hero or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a nice way to leave it.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you would be so kind to leave us a review, that would help a lot.